The phone flew out of my hand and hit the stone floor with a sharp, splitting crack. But that wasn't what made the whole room go silent. What stunned everyone was the sight of a tall man pinning a 51-year-old woman against a steel railing in the middle of a crowded airport, while not a single person stepped forward to intervene. His forearm pressed harder against my chest. "I already told you. Get out of here. Now." I heard every word. I also heard someone laugh behind me. The scrape of a chair, a whisper, and the silence of dozens of people watching it all. None of them knew that in less than 24 hours, that man would be begging for the chance to explain what he had done. Because in that moment, he thought I was just some anonymous, middle-aged woman sitting in the wrong place in a military lounge. He looked at me exactly once and decided I wasn't worth respecting. It was the worst decision of his life. And by the time he finally learned who I really was, it was far too late to undo any of it. It was a cold morning in late October, O'Hare International in Chicago. Rain was dragging gray streaks down the enormous windows of a second-floor lounge, reserved for service members passing through. The light inside was the color of dishwater. Outside, the runway lights blinked through the mist like buoys lost at sea. And I was sitting in a corner near the bar, holding a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. I'm Diane Keller. I was 51 years old that morning. I wore a charcoal jacket, dark trousers, and shoes built for walking through too many terminals. Nothing about me asked to be noticed. That was on purpose. Because here's what nobody in that lounge knew. For almost 25 years, I'd worked inside the parts of the Navy that don't show up in recruiting commercials. Rooms with no signs on the doors, buildings with no windows, briefings where people didn't use their real names. Being forgettable wasn't an accident for me. For a long stretch of my life, being forgettable had been the entire job. And I was very, very good at it. I noticed him about 10 minutes before he noticed me. His name, I'd learn later, was Brett Cordell, 34, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of haircut and the kind of posture that tells you everything before he opens his mouth. He sat near the entrance with a younger guy, both of them in civilian clothes. And on the back of Brett's hand was a small tattoo most people wouldn't recognize. I recognized it instantly. A trident. The mark that special operators earn through something close to hell. Old habits. When your whole career is built on noticing what other people miss, you never really switch it off. I looked at him once. Then I went back to my coffee and forgot he existed. He did not return the favor. And honestly, this is the part I've turned over in my head 100 times since, because what happened next didn't come from nowhere. I don't think Brett Cordell was a monster. I want to be fair to the truth here. He'd spent 15 years in a world that taught him, every single day, that authority looks a certain way and threats look a certain way and people who belong carry themselves a certain way. He'd earned his place through pain most of us will never understand. And somewhere along the line, all that hard-won pride had curdled into something uglier. A reflex that told him he could read a person's whole worth at a single glance. That reflex was about to walk him straight off a cliff. He just didn't know it yet. His chair scraped backward. He crossed the lounge. He stopped beside my table. "Excuse me," he said. I looked up. "Yes? This is a military lounge." His tone was already flat, already certain. "I'm aware," I said. "Authorized personnel only." He let the words sit there like a trap. "You need to head out." And for one full second, I genuinely didn't understand him. Then I did. He thought I'd wandered in by mistake. He thought I was a civilian who'd slipped past a sign she couldn't read. Part of me, the tired part, the part that had been flying for 2 days straight, just wanted to show him my ID and end it. 3 seconds. That's all it would have taken. But another part of me, an older and more curious part, wanted to see exactly how far a man like this would go when he was certain he was right. So I said nothing useful. "I belong here," I told him. "No," he said. "You don't. I'll be honest with you. If I'd been smarter, or less tired, I'd have flashed the badge in the first 5 seconds, because who has the patience to let it escalate? But I'd spent a quarter century watching human beings reveal who they really were. And I'd learned that the fastest way to understand a man is to let him keep talking when he thinks he's winning. The younger soldier near the door shifted in his seat. He could feel it. Even if he couldn't name it, the sense of a situation tipping toward something it shouldn't. He half rose. He didn't commit. Brett ignored him completely. "Let's not do this," I said quietly. "We're already doing it." His voice climbed. "Get up." I shook my head. One small movement. "No." And that was when his hand closed around my arm. It happened fast. Faster than I expected, and I expect a lot. He yanked me upright, and my chair tipped and clattered against the floor, and somebody across the room sucked in a breath. Then his forearm came up across my chest, and my back hit the steel railing, and a flash of pain shot up my spine. Not serious. Just enough. Just enough to turn the cold thing in my stomach into something white hot. But here's what I'd learned about myself over 25 years. My anger isn't fuel. It's a tool I taught myself to set down. So I went still. He thought I'd given up. They always think that. He grabbed my phone off the table and threw it down the bar. It slid the length of the marble and spun to a stop. Now get out, he said. Nobody moved. A woman near the espresso machine froze mid-stir. A man in a suit lowered his newspaper a few inches and stared over the top of it. Someone by the window whispered something that sounded like a prayer or a curse. And I stood there, pinned against cold steel. And I want to tell you exactly what moved through my mind in that moment. Because it wasn't fear, and it wasn't even anger anymore. It was something closer to grief, because I'd seen this exact kind of man 100 times. The kind who looks at a still, quiet woman and decides she's prey. The kind who mistakes calm for weakness and silence for permission. And I was so tired of it. I was so deeply tired of making myself small so men like this could feel large. If you've ever stood in a room, an office, a store, a family dinner, and felt someone's eyes slide right past you like you were a piece of furniture, then you already know the exact temperature of what I was feeling. That specific ache of being treated like you don't count. Hold on to that feeling. Because the universe was about to answer it. Then my phone rang. The bartender, a heavy-set man in his 50s with gray hair and the eyes of someone who's seen a lot of nonsense, walked down the bar and picked it up. He glanced at the screen. He glanced at the scene in front of him. And then he did the only reasonable thing. He answered it and held it up. A voice came out of that little speaker, and it filled the entire lounge. Release her. Brett froze. The voice came again, harder this time, with the unmistakable edge of a man who has given orders his whole life and watched them obeyed. That is an order, Chief. And I watched something extraordinary happen in Brett's body. His arm came off my chest before his brain had even caught up. Because that's the thing about that kind of training, it lives deeper than thought. It lives in the spine. He didn't lower his arm because he understood. He lowered it because a part of him he couldn't override had recognized authority in that voice. I straightened my jacket. I rolled my shoulders once. And I watched the confusion bloom across his face like spilled ink. Then the voice said the thing that turned the whole room to glass. Put Commander Keller on the line. Commander. Let me just sit in that word with you for a second. Because looking back, I think it's one of the most satisfying words I've ever heard spoken about myself. Every person in that lounge heard it land. The young soldier by the door turned his head so fast you'd think someone had called his name. The bartender's mouth opened slightly. And Brett Cordell. Brett looked like a man who'd just heard the ice crack under his boots in the middle of a frozen lake. I walked the length of the bar, unhurried. I picked up the phone. Keller speaking, I said. The voice softened, but only a little. I'm already in the terminal. 2 minutes out, don't let him leave. The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly and turned around. And now I was looking at Brett Cordell. And Brett Cordell was looking at me like the floor had quietly turned to water beneath him. Here's something I've learned about silence over the years. It's never actually empty. It fills up with everything people are too afraid to say out loud. And the silence in that lounge had real weight to it now. It pressed down on the coffee cups, and the leather chairs, and the rain on the glass. And it pressed down hardest of all on the man near the bar, who a minute ago had been all motion and certainty, and who now stood there trying to reverse engineer exactly how many decisions had carried him into this catastrophe. The bartender cleared his throat. Ma'am? You okay? And I saw the embarrassment on his face, not guilt, because he'd done nothing wrong, but that particular shame decent people feel when cruelty happens close to them, and they couldn't stop it fast enough. I'm fine, I said. It wasn't entirely true. My arm throbbed. My back ached against the memory of the railing. But it was true enough for strangers. Brett opened his mouth. Commander, don't. One word. It stopped him cold, far better than shouting ever could. And I sat back down. I want you to understand why that mattered. Because it's easy to miss. I didn't sit because I was beaten. I sat because sitting was a choice, and standing there like a victim would have made everyone in that room comfortable in exactly the wrong way. After 25 years in uniform, I'd learned one thing above all else: a room takes its shape from whoever refuses to panic. So I sat. I picked up my overturned coffee cup, empty as it was, and set it upright on the table. A small piece of order restored in the middle of chaos, and while I waited for the captain to arrive, my mind did what my mind always does under pressure. It traveled backward. Not to the career people knew about, the one my sister describes at family gatherings as Diane's desk job with the government. Not the version where my own mother told the neighbors I did something with naval paperwork, with a little shrug that meant she was proud but had given up trying to understand. I'd let them shrink me like that for decades. I'd worn it like a coat. On paper, I'm a commander in the United States Navy. In reality, for most of my life, I'd been a ghost with a workstation, sitting in rooms where the clocks showed 3 different time zones, and nobody trusted the sun. My work was never the kind civilians picture when they imagine heroism. I never kicked in a door. I never dropped out of a helicopter. I never carried a weapon through a sandstorm. What I did was find people. That's the simplest way I know to put it. I took fragments half of a radio call, a satellite image smothered in cloud cover, a strange pattern in how trucks move through a valley at night, and I built them into a picture clear enough that other people could bet their lives on it. Sometimes I found hostages. Sometimes I found teams that had gone silent when silence meant something terrible. And sometimes I found a way out where everyone else on Earth saw nothing but walls. Which brings me to the part of this that I almost never tell anyone. Because 13 years before Brett Cordell put his hands on me, I found a way out of a mountain. Let me take you there. It was late autumn in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan, and the storm that rolled in arrived like a verdict, colder than anyone forecast. Wind that ripped sound into pieces. Cloud cover low enough to turn every ridgeline into a blind corner. A 7-man reconnaissance team had gone in light watch, confirm, leave. That was the whole plan. But plans are fragile things. People talk about them like they're built of steel, but they're really made of glass, strong right up until the wrong pressure finds the wrong spot. That team was compromised before dawn. By nightfall, their way out had collapsed. By midnight, command believed they were gone. I was 38 then. Younger in rank, old in the ways that count. I'd been watching that valley for 9 straight days. Not casually. I knew the goat trails and the dry creek beds and the way the weather slid over the ridge when the wind turned after dark. I knew where the enemy liked to gather before pushing uphill, and where they wouldn't go unless they had no choice left. And when the official rescue route closed, everyone in that operations room started saying the same word. Wait. Wait for morning. Wait for the storm to lift. Wait for air support to see something. But I knew a secret those cautious people kept forgetting. Waiting is not neutral. Waiting kills quietly, while reasonable people discuss safer options. The team leader came over the radio one time. I remember the sound of his breathing more than his words. 1 critical, he said. 2 walking wounded. Ammo's low. And then static ate the rest. There are moments in this kind of work where every single option is wrong, and the only question left is which wrong thing gives life a chance. I found my answer at 3:17 inches the morning. A seam in the weather. 4 minutes wide, maybe 5. A narrow break opening southeast of the team's position, sliding along a ridge that looked like suicide on a flat map. But maps lie when they flatten mountains. I'd stared at that terrain. So long it had stopped being flat in my mind. It rose. It turned. It almost breathed. I could feel the route like a thread running under my fingertips. So I built it. I argued for it. I defended it against every cautious voice in the room and recalculated it every 90 seconds as the storm shifted around the aircraft. For 3 hours I spoke in a voice steadier than I felt while pilots flew through weather that does not forgive. I remember a chief leaning over my shoulder whispering, "You sure about this?" And I remember saying yes, even though certainty was a luxury nobody in that room actually owned. At 4:11, 2 aircraft reached the ridge. At 4:16, 6 men were aboard. At 4:18, the storm slammed shut behind them like a door. 6 came home. 1 did not. His name was Petty Officer Marcus Vale. He'd held the northern approach long enough for the others to live until the helicopters arrived. I knew that, because I'd watched the whole terrible geometry of it unfold from above. His position went still on my screen before the weather opened. And here's the part I still carry. I didn't stop working when it happened. I couldn't. Stopping for the dead would have killed the living. That's an arithmetic no human being should ever have to learn. But once you learn it, you carry it forever. For 13 years, I carried Marcus Vale's name in a place no one could see, The reports were classified, the commendations were scrubbed. The rescue became a quiet legend inside the community, and I remained a blank space at the center of it. That was how the work functioned. That was how I functioned. And now, sitting in that airport lounge, staring at the trident on Brett Cordell's hand, I felt the past lean toward the present, because he was the right age, the right community, the right generation of that war. And a cold, impossible thought moved through me. It was possible, just barely possible, that the man who'd thrown my phone across a bar was alive because 13 years ago, in a room with no windows, I'd found a seam in a storm. The captain arrived 2 minutes later, though it felt longer, because everyone in that lounge had been silently counting. The doors sighed open and a man stepped through with the kind of controlled urgency that doesn't look like hurry because it's been trained out of a person. Captain Raymond Doyle, late 50s, tall and lean, silver coming in at the temples, a face shaped more by responsibility than by years. He wore service khakis under a dark travel coat, and the 4 stripes on his shoulder boards settled the room before he said a single word. And here's what told you everything about the man. His eyes found me first. He didn't look at Brett. He didn't look at the young soldier. He didn't scan for the loudest person. He walked straight to me, stopped at a respectful distance, and lowered his voice. Commander Keller, I'm sorry I'm late. I stood, because you stand. Nothing happened that can't be handled, sir. His eyes moved once over my arm, my jacket, the way I was holding myself. Not obvious. He was too disciplined for obvious. But I'd worked with him long enough to recognize a quiet inventory of damage when I saw one. That's not the same as nothing happening, he said. No, sir. Only then did he turn. And Brett had already come to attention without deciding to, shoulders squared, hands flat at his sides, chin tucked. His body remembered what his mind was still trying to deny. Chief Cordell, Doyle said. And I watched the last hope drain out of Brett's face, because some small, desperate part of him had been praying this was a misunderstanding. That the voice on the phone had used the wrong name, that I wasn't who the whole room now suspected. But Doyle knew him, and Doyle knew me. You put your hands on Commander Keller. A swallow. Yes, sir. You pinned a senior officer against a bar in a public lounge. Yes, sir. You threw her phone. Yes, sir. The room didn't move. Even the rain seemed to fall quieter against the glass. And Doyle stepped closer, and he didn't raise his voice, because men like Doyle never need volume when authority is already doing the work for them. Was there any threat to you? No, sir. Was she aggressive? No, sir. Did she try to force her way into a restricted area? Brett's jaw flexed. No, sir. Then explain to me why I'm standing here. And this was the moment. I watched his face, because I'd seen 100 men reach this exact fork in the road, and I knew that what he said next would tell me everything about who he actually was. There was a coward's answer waiting for him, polished smooth by pride. I didn't know who she was. She looked like she didn't belong. I thought she was lying. All of it available. All of it easy. Instead, he looked at the floor. Because I was wrong, sir. And I'll be honest with you, that surprised me. Because the easy thing, the human thing, would have been to reach for an excuse. The fact that he didn't was the first crack of light I saw in this man. You were more than wrong, Doyle said. Yes, sir. And then Doyle turned slightly toward me and asked the question that put the entire weight of the moment into my hands. Commander, do you want airport police involved? There it was. The power, clean and terrible, sliding across the room and settling on me. A complaint would be completely justified. Witnesses everywhere. The assault was clear as glass. Brett's career, his reputation, his command, his entire future, all of it now balanced on what I chose to do with my anger. And make no mistake, I had anger. That part matters. Mercy means nothing if there's no anger underneath it. Forgiveness handed out too fast is usually just fear wearing nice clothes. But before I could answer, someone stood up at the back of the lounge. He'd been sitting in a corner chair by the window, half hidden behind a pillar and a tired potted plant. Mid-60s. Close-cropped gray hair, a jacket that fit like it had once covered a bigger man. He carried himself with the heaviness of someone whose joints remember old injuries and bad weather. Sir, he said. Doyle turned. But the man wasn't looking at Doyle. He was looking at me. What operation were you talking about? The question landed strangely in the room. It didn't belong to the present moment. It came from somewhere much deeper. Doyle's eyes narrowed. I don't believe anyone was speaking to you, Senior Chief. So, Doyle knew him too. The old man nodded once. No, sir. I understand that. But I heard the year. And I heard the ridge. My hands went still in my lap. He took one step forward. Afghanistan. Late autumn. A storm that boxed in the whole valley. 7-man element. 1 man critical before they got out. Nobody breathed. Tell me I'm wrong. There are ghosts that refuse to stay buried, and it's usually because they were never really dead. They were only waiting. Waiting for the right room, the right witness, the right name spoken carelessly enough to crack the door open. And I felt Marcus Vale's name rise up inside my chest. Doyle looked at me, and in that single glance I read the question he was offering me. Do you want this stopped? And I could have stopped it. God knows I had the training. A polite correction. A cold look. One sentence about inappropriate conversation in a public space, and the wall would have slid right back into place. The old machinery was sitting there inside me, ready and familiar. Instead, I said, What's your name? The old man straightened. Walt Brennan, ma'am. Senior Chief, retired. His voice roughened at the edges. I was on that ridge, and the lounge just dissolved. The bar, the chairs, the rain, the strangers, all of it gone for a moment. And there was only the mountain again. The screens, the static, the weather, the little green track lines crawling across a map in a room with no windows. Walt Brennan looked at me with eyes that had been waiting 13 years for an answer he'd been promised he would never get. We never knew, he said. They told us somebody found a way through. They never gave us a name, we asked. Every year we asked. His face tightened. Was it you? I want you to understand why this is the heart of the whole thing. Because everything up to that point had been about being underestimated. And that's a feeling we all know. But this is a different and deeper fear. This is the fear that the most important thing you ever did will go unseen. That you'll save lives, change everything, and disappear from the story completely. And the chance to finally be recognized after years of invisibility, there is almost nothing more powerful that can happen to a person. I looked at Walt Brennan. And I made a choice that went against 25 years of instinct. 6 of you came home, I said. His eyes filled before he could stop them. God help me, he whispered. It was you. He didn't move toward me. And that told me something about him. A younger man might have crossed the room without thinking, grabbed my hands, pulled me into some grateful embrace because the emotion outran the judgment. Walt stayed where he was. He understood distance. He understood permission. He understood that some truths can't be approached quickly. I was 39, he said, one hand resting on the back of a leather chair. Not for support, I think, but because a man needs somewhere to put his body when the past comes walking up to him. Even Captain Doyle let the room belong to Walt now. Old enough to know we weren't getting out. We'd been watching that valley for days. Bad place, bad weather, bad feeling from the start. He looked at me and I nodded, because I knew. I knew all of it. Vale was on the north approach, he said, and he spoke the name the way people speak around something sacred. Marcus Vale. 27 years old. Had a daughter he'd only met twice, because deployment kept eating the calendar. Carried her picture in a plastic sleeve in his kit. Showed it to anybody who stood still long enough. A small, broken laugh. We gave him hell for it. But we all looked. Every single time. A woman near the espresso machine pressed her hand over her mouth. Walt didn't notice. When command told us the window was closed, we knew what that meant. They don't say you're on your own. They never say it like that. They say weather is below minimums. They say hold position. They say assets are being evaluated. His mouth went hard. But when you're bleeding on a ridge, and the ammo's running out, you learn to translate that polite language real fast. Brett Cordell stood near the bar, completely still now. The young soldier had lowered his eyes to the floor. We had 1 man critical. Too hurt, too bad to move fast. Vale kept the north side from folding. Every time they pushed, he answered. Every time I was sure that side was gone, he was still there. Walt's voice thinned out. Last thing I heard from him was almost calm. He said, Tell them to hurry if they're coming. He looked down. I thought they weren't coming. That's the truth. I thought we were done. And I felt the old room close around me again. The blue light on exhausted faces, coffee burned down to tar, a weather officer reading numbers in a voice that wanted to crack and refused to. And I could see Marcus Vale's track on the screen one more time. The north side. The position Walt was describing. The red movement closing in. And the small, stubborn patch of space that 1 man kept alive with his own body. There was a moment, Walt said, when the radio went quiet, and I thought maybe that was mercy. Maybe we'd just stop hearing all the ways we weren't going to make it. He laughed once, and there was no humor in it, only 13 years of disbelief. Then I heard rotors. I thought I was hallucinating. I genuinely did. I thought, this is what your mind does at the end. It gives you the sound of rescue because the real thing isn't coming. He looked at Doyle, then back at me. But it came. I found myself stepping forward without deciding to. Petty Officer Vale held that approach for 46 minutes after his partner went down, I said. Walt's head came up. I didn't look away from him. The enemy's cleanest path to your position ran straight through that northern cut. If they'd taken it before the aircraft arrived, the extraction fails. The pilots fly into a kill zone, or they wave off. Vale knew that. He held it long past the point where holding it could have saved his own life. A tear slid down Walt Brennan's face, and he made no move to hide it. He bought us the time. Yes, I said. He did. And those words landed differently than everything else in that room. Not loud, not dramatic, just true. Walt closed his eyes for a moment. I named my grandson Marcus, he said. My daughter asked me why. I told her he was a man who paid a debt for all of us before any of us knew how much we owed. And behind him, Brett Cordell made a sound so small it almost got lost. Not a sob, not a gasp, more like a breath catching on something sharp. Walt turned, slowly, and for the first time he looked fully at Brett. You know what she did, Chief? Brett couldn't answer. Walt's voice hardened not with cruelty, but with the weight of a man who's earned the right to be disappointed. Men like you and me came home because people like her sat in rooms with no windows and found the road back. We got the medals you can see. They carried the names you can't. Brett's face had gone bloodless. I didn't know, he said, and it came out weak. Walt stared at him. That's not the defense you think it is. And that line hit harder than anything the captain had said. Because it's true, isn't it? I didn't know is what we all reach for. But not knowing was never the problem. The problem was what Brett decided before he knew anything at all. The problem was looking at a quiet woman and giving himself permission. Brett looked at me then, and there was nothing left in his face. No pride, no performance, no operator's swagger. Just a man standing inside the actual size of what he'd done. Ma'am, he said, and his voice shook. I don't deserve forgiveness. And he was right. But that had never been the most important question. Captain Doyle waited until those words settled. Commander, he said quietly, what do you want done? The question came back heavier now. Before, it had been about an assault in an airport. Now it carried 13 years of a buried name, a dead man on a northern approach. 6 futures that existed because someone unseen had found a way through a storm. It carried every woman I'd ever watched shrink herself in a professional room so a man wouldn't feel challenged. It carried every quiet person who'd ever been mistaken for harmless by someone who thought being loud was the same as being worthy. I looked at Brett Cordell. His hands weren't clenched anymore. His shoulders had dropped. He looked smaller, but not weaker. And there's a real difference between those two things. Sometimes a man has to lose the costume before you can see whether anything decent is standing underneath it. You grabbed me, I said. Yes, ma'am. You pinned me against a bar. Yes, ma'am. You threw my phone because you wanted me powerless. His mouth tightened. Yes, ma'am. And you didn't do that because I was a commander. You did it because you decided I was nobody. He swallowed hard. Yes, ma'am. I stepped closer, not enough to threaten him, just enough that he couldn't pretend my words belonged to the whole room instead of to him alone. That's the part you carry. Not my rank. Not Captain Doyle. Not Senior Chief Brennan. Not even the fact that I might be tied to men you respect. The wrong thing happened before you knew any of that. The wrong thing was the decision you made when you looked at a quiet woman and gave yourself permission. His eyes were wet. I know. No, I said. You understand it right now. Actually knowing it will take a lot longer. He nodded once. I turned to Doyle. Sir, I want consequences. Real ones. A written record. Witness statements. Command involvement. Whatever corrective process you believe is proportionate. Brett didn't flinch, and that mattered. But I don't want his career ended today. Doyle studied me. That's mercy he hasn't earned. I know. Then why give it? And I looked past him, at the rain running down the windows, at the strangers who'd been dragged into the most private public moment of my life, at Walt Brennan standing there with grief and gratitude fighting on his face, at the young soldier who looked like he'd aged 5 years since breakfast. Because destruction is easy, I said. Correction is hard. And if he's capable of becoming a better man, then the service needs that better version more than the world needs one more bitter person telling himself he got ruined by bad luck. Doyle nodded slowly. Very well, and he turned to Brett. You heard the commander. You'll receive every consequence she just requested, and you will not mistake her mercy for dismissal. You assaulted a senior officer. You humiliated yourself, this command, and that trident on your hand. From today forward, you earn back. Trust one watch, one order, one decision at a time. And every time you feel like feeling sorry for yourself, you'll remember that the woman you put your hands on asked me to correct you instead of end you. Yes, sir. Doyle leaned in slightly. And Chief, if you ever again confuse strength with the right to frighten someone weaker than you, I won't need the commander's permission. It won't happen again, sir. I've thought a lot about what that whole morning taught me, and it comes down to this. The mistake most people make is believing that respect is something you give to a job title, a uniform, a loud voice, a confident posture. But the thing I understood that nobody else in that room did, at least not at first, is that the people most worth respecting are very often the ones who never demand it. The quiet ones. The ones doing the work in the rooms with no windows. And if the only time you'd have treated me with dignity is after you found out my rank, then your respect was never really respect at all. It was just fear of consequences wearing a polite mask. So here's something you can actually do today, and it costs you nothing. The next time you walk into a room, find the person everyone else is looking past, the quiet one, the one who doesn't seem important, and treat them like they might be the most important person there, because sometimes they are. And here's the question I want you to sit with after this video ends. Who in your life has a quiet strength that you've never once thanked them for? Maybe today's the day you do. A few weeks later, Brett Cordell requested 5 minutes with me through the proper channels. He showed up at my office in uniform, cover tucked under his arm, sober and straight. No excuses this time. No stress, no fatigue, no misunderstanding. He stood in front of my desk and said, "Commander, I was wrong before I knew who you were." That's the sentence I keep coming back to. And it was the first thing he'd said that made me believe the change might actually outlast the shame. I told him about Marcus Vale then, not the classified parts, just enough. The northern approach, the 46 minutes, the daughter whose photo he carried, the way one man's courage made room for 6 futures. Brett listened without moving. And when I finished, he said, "I'll carry his name correctly. We never became friends. That would make a cleaner story than the truth. What grew between us was respect. And respect is often quieter and harder and far more useful than warmth ever is." That spring, I finally went to the memorial wall I'd avoided for 13 years. I found Marcus Vale's name carved in the stone and pressed my palm beneath it. The stone was cold. The sky was gray. A family passed behind me, slowed, and moved on with that careful silence people use around grief. 6 came home, I said. You bought them the time. And for the first time I said it out loud, where the world could hear me, and I did not disappear. So if you've spent years making yourself smaller because it felt safer, hear this from someone who learned it the hard way. Humility that comes late is not the same thing as vanishing. Quiet strength is still strength. Service does not require you to erase yourself. And the people who only start respecting you after they discover your title, those people were never the real measure of your worth. Before you go, I want to hear from you, because this story lives or dies on what you think of the choice I made at the end. So tell me in the comments. Comment 1, if you think I was right to show him mercy. Comment 2, if you think I let him off too easy. Or comment 3, if you're honestly still torn about it, because I'll be reading every single one. And tell me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there right now, because I love seeing how far these stories travel. And I have to ask, have you ever been in a room where someone looked right through you like you didn't matter, only to watch them realize how wrong they were? If you have, tell me about it. I think a lot of us need to hear we're not alone in that. And if this story moved you even a little, do me one small favor and subscribe. Because this is exactly the kind of story I tell here. Stories about dignity, about justice, about the quiet people who hold the whole world up without ever asking for credit. Stay with me. There's another one coming, and I think it might hit even harder than this one. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences. fully rewritten and reimagined in Chicago to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.